All right. Well, today I have one of my oldest friends here, and one of his coworkers who recently talked at Backstage Con. Now, do you camel case that? Do you uppercase the B, the S, obviously the C, or do you lowercase the S?
Lowercase the
You,
s.
yeah,
Oh,
lowercase f. It's all one word.
that like isn't that impossible to resist? Uppercasing the S.
I think it's a matter of intonation. Like if you're talking about, you're at, I don't know, pick your poison. You're at a Pink Floyd concert, and you're like, "We're gonna go backstage."
Uh huh.
Then
Yes.
with that one, you would capitalize the S. But if you know, you're saying there's a lot going on backstage,
Yeah.
then you would do that. So it's just depends on how you are excited you are in the moment. I suppose backstage the software can get pretty exciting at times.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And in that case, you'd want to camel case it.
Our bigger issue is that we are called frontside, our company's called frontside, and then when people talk about frontside and backstage, they end up saying backside and front stage.
Backside.
So there's that whole thing that happens.
I have often reflected that it's sort of a delightfully ironic name for the company, given that you work on
Mhm.
the backstage stuff now. But anyways, so why don't y'all introduce yourself? Let's go in alphabetical order.
I guess that would be me.
That's right.
Um,
Good job.
so, well, yeah, I think so. It depends on if we're going first name or last name. Uh,
Oh.
but okay, my name is Charles Lowell. I'm the CTO of Frontside. Frontside actually refers to the experience of any particular given software. So you experience everything from what you can see right in front of you. And so whether we're doing user experience or whether we're working on back-end systems, the way that we're going to approach it is from the front side. So there's the etymology of the company. And so viewed from that sense, it does accord with Backstage and the things that we're trying to do in Backstage, which is focus on the user experience, not of only working with it, but what it's like to use it.
I'm Taras Mankovski. I'm the CEO of Frontside. And Frontside, so Charles as a founder sets the spiritual and the inspirational lighthouse for us. But Frontside as a company, what we do is provide backstage support, and we're a professional backstage professional services partner. So we help companies adopt Backstage, and a lot of our approaches are very much inspired by Charles's view, and it's very developer experience centric. Specific, and we bring a lot of that developer experience focus to the conversations around supporting Backstage and growing developer portals.
And then so how did y'all? I mean, what? So walk us through, and by us, I guess I mean me. Like through like how did you end up doing this? Because I've known Charles a long time, and the front side has done all sorts of things over the years. So at some point, y'all must have been like, we're gonna do this backstage stuff. Like how did that come about?
Yeah, we had a client who we still have a client. We actually we work with them that need a developer portal, and we've always been developer experience centric. And then when we started talking to them about creating a developer portal, we were talking about a lot of things that Backstage had, but I didn't even know that Backstage existed. So someone actually within the organization mentioned Backstage, and we looked at Backstage, we're like, yes, we should do this. Because one of the biggest problems with a lot of portals is that they never get enough attention. Every portal is just enough was invested into it to make it work, but not enough to make it good. And that's the underlying problem with a lot of developer portals. So having essentially a framework that is available and is iterated independently, so you can then just use it to create a developer experience you want, was very appealing, and it's paid off.
And then so like okay, I mean you've hit on it there a little bit, but what is like with the that initial client and the ones that you have now, like what are they doing with Backstage? Like what are the needs they have for I don't know, an internal development portal beyond like a wiki page or whatever, right? Like, and because that, like, it's, there's a lot more going on than just like a static set of pages that one might call in the olden days knowledge management and like, you know, project status and things like that. And so like there's something that what hasn't been satisfied that Backstage is kind of filling in there. That's always hard for me to, as I'm doing here, talk about concisely or describe.
Yeah, I think there is so if we look at the history of Backstage and Spotify, like it originally emerged as a tool to help streamline certain processes, and it's grown from there. And I think a lot of because of Spotify kind of engineering organization, in their organization it was very natural for developers to own their like developer experience. So so Backstage internally is a combination. I think they have something like 40 different teams contributing to Backstage, where each team is using a kind of like putty. You know, they all add their little bits to make their to add the pieces that they need to improve their, you know. So they people within Spotify, they all go to Backstage to basically do anything. Like you essentially you can't get work done without going to Spotify, or without going to Backstage at Spotify, because everything that you need to be productive is there. And over time from that, like there's emerged kind of patterns. So like the software catalog is a pattern that is now represented by a plugin. So it's a tool that organizations can use to allow developers to control metadata for different assets within the organization. So, and for those assets, you know, typically are like, you know, you might have a service, or you might have libraries or components that you share across the organization. So the catalog gives developers control over metadata about those things. And from that metadata, you then create the actual user experience that you see in the Backstage portal.
Yeah, I think it's an important way to strike the proper trade-off between distribution and centralization. You know, I think, you know, the pendulum always swings in between those two poles, where you have a very centralized system where of software development and deployment, where you kind of hand things off to you know, your deployment team or whatever. That was kind of the old school way of doing it. And then, you know, the revolution that's been happening for a while now is giving agency to individual developers to manage their own deployments and manage their own services and break things apart. But the problem is it can be difficult to share knowledge between those different things. So if I'm an organization and I've got 100 different services, and I've got each one of those services is deployed in 5 different environments, you've got this fractal complexity that could emerge. And so it's a way of kind of, as I see it, reining that in and almost inverting control. So what's interesting is that rather than being a portal that you maintain, the individual projects can give information about themselves, and then Backstage can pull that in. So if you're familiar with the CI/CD model, it would be kind of the difference between old school Jenkins and a system like Circle CI or Travis, where you know, in the old school CI, you kind of had a central management of the CI processes, whereas kind of the key innovation of those distributed CI models was you provided the general infrastructure, but each project could just kind of plug in and say, this is how you build me, this is how you distribute me, and then it carries away. So I think the inversion of control is an important aspect of it.
So I mean to crudify it, so to speak, you're basically like, we need one UI for all the development we're doing in this organization, and you could call it a console. Hence one of my favorite words ever, portal. You know, the place that we go to do that. And the opposite of having one UI would be worst case scenario, like every single team, whatever a team is defined, whether it's like component or product or geography, every team basically just has like their own way of like writing up and adding the metadata about their projects. And you just have to figure that out team by team, right? And then but then the part that y'all are talking about that's in there as well is, and then in addition to that, the way that the developers on each team like are interacting with the whole, I don't, for lack of a better phrase, like just the software delivery process. There's basically a standardization of that as well, right? Like in this kind of the same way that if you do like an inverted like CI/CD pipeline, there is like there's a specification of how you're going to be doing builds now. Like everyone can't just come up with their own way of doing it. So you're really like you're standardizing how software is done, not at the coding level, but how you package it up and move it along towards production, essentially, and everything else that's involved there.
Yeah, it's a combination of giving developers what they need to be productive at the stage that they're at, because for some developers in the organization, being productive means give me a really good starting point, because I don't know what all the pieces that I need to use, right? So having a place to start, so like having all of your resources aggregated in a single place, so when I go and look, I could find everything, but then also being able to use an existing template to create like a new React app or create a new service that automatically deploys using best practices on our platform. So for someone who is not familiar with the ecosystem within the organization, having a starting point is really helpful. But for someone who has a lot of experience, the flip side of that is being able to adjust that that experience to match their understanding. Like if they need something new and they want to be able to, like they already know everything that's available, but they realize that it could be better, having the ability to change it or be able to contribute upstream. So that's the other aspect of the developer experience using a portal that's now happening as a result of Backstage being adopted. There's this inner source practice that's being cultivated or it's being built, starting with the developer portal.
Yeah, I mean, you're that part's interesting in the way of I don't even know what the phrases for this are, but usually in like a large organization, you get all your enterprise architects and governance people together, and they define what the software delivery factory or process is like. We got all these stages and documents you have to fill out, and to some extent, like if you were to take the maximal idea of whatever it is we're talking about here, you could kind of like start to program that more than it be a bunch of like Word documents or Google documents or whatever. And like, so the role of whoever's specifying how software is done in an organization is more to say, it's going back to your thing, Charles, like here's like the execution pipeline that's going to happen. And here's like the little plugins that you have to add in that describe your product or your software. And then you can do whatever else. And then also, like, because it's all actually code instead of like, turning on suggest changes in some document somewhere or going to some terrible meeting to discuss like some policy change, you could actually like just like suggest some way we're going to change this and like submit a PR or whatever. And we'll get these people together and see if we want to just like accept that, which seems better, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think and it applies for every aspect of the development. So, we were talking a little bit in the green room phase about why not just use a wiki, for example. And, the problem is the wikis have this issue where they end up going dead at some point because nobody's maintaining them or someone has migrated to some other technology. And so, kind of the inverted, say, Backstage way is let a project have control over its own documentation and then communicate whatever your organization's documentation platform is. Let the project say, hey, I'm using this markdown, or I'm using TS doc, or I'm using this documentation tool, and if that changes, well, the project can essentially update the pointer, so to speak, and your portal doesn't go stale. Because you've now evolved, so you're not locked in to one particular technology. All
right. So now we had, or at least I do, have a little bit of the dream. so to speak, like what the point is and what happens. But like, so like, what is the actual if I go down to CompUSA and I buy the Backstage kit, like what am I gonna get? Like what are the actual components and like the parts of it? Like I'm pretty sure Kubernetes is involved somewhere, whether I want it to be or not. And then like what do I do? Like what's the architecture of it basically? What are all the parts?
So there are 5 core components that are 4 plugins. Let's call them plugins. There are 5 core plugins that are included with Backstage, which are built on a framework that is a fairly standard like client server architecture. So there's a React application on the front end, and then there is node processes running in the backend, which provide a server that the client connects to. That's the kind of the general architecture. But with the 5 plugins that come out of the box are the catalog, so it's the software catalog, the scaffolder, so it's a way to create templates that generate code that is pushed into repositories, and then that code is registered as a component in the catalog. There is search, which makes it possible to find things within your ecosystem. There is the Kubernetes plugin, which allows you to hook up your, if your components in the catalog represent services, those services are probably deployed to Kubernetes. So the Kubernetes plugin allows you to show information about the services in the catalog. And there is, I think that's 4, and there is, what else is there? And then there's like 100.
Tech docs, right?
And tech docs, yeah. So the tech docs is documentation as code, where the markdown files are stored in the repository, and then they're auto-generated and made visible in Backstage.
Right. Okay. And then so you're saying like there's components, and a component, does that represent like the software that a team's working on? Like what is a component?
A component is, so there's different types of components. So a service, a website, a library, and then you can create your own types of components.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, the object model is kind of deliberately loose. So I think component is one of the better understood. But the other thing that's neat about it is essentially the catalog, which really underpins so much of Backstage, is it's just a graph of things at your organization, and you can kind of draw arbitrary connections between them. So you've got these components, but you also can have references to where these repositories house these components. You can draw connections of which people are the contributors to these components. So if you have a question about a particular service, you can actually look up and you can say, this person is associated with this. Now, I don't know if you actually get that out of the box, but those are the kinds of inferences that you can draw.
Right. Yeah, and so that, I mean, that's the other thing I was interested, since y'all work with several people on this, is hearing is like, it seems like, with my crude understanding, the one of the original problems that Backstage was looking to solve is like, especially in the Spotify, since it's like, I forget the number. We got like 10,000 microservices running around here.
Mm-hmm.
And
what the hell is going on?
Yeah, and not only what are they, how do they work, but like who can I talk to about them? Like who owns this, right? And then I remember like there was an intriguing
case.
Which ones
are on Kubernetes? Which one are on AWS? How
much
are they costing me? Yeah.
Right, and so you have that catalog, like one, and it's still kind of like just this more or less static catalog of like, here's all these different services, and now you at least know what they are. Here's documentation for them, as you were saying, you can check in, and here's at least some person or an email address that owns it, or like that you could talk to about it. I'm being a little facetious here. Here's who owns it, right? And then I don't know what the object model, as you say, is for this stuff. But then you can also add in, like, I remember one case they had that was interesting. That was like, well, we want to convert everyone over to Python. So we stuck this thing in here that basically said you need to convert to Python, or you've already converted to Python, or like you need to upgrade your Python version. And so it's almost like I don't know which direction this injection goes, but it sounds like once you set up that catalog or whatever it is, you could actually start going in there and adding in like all these other little embellishments and layers of governance. That's probably not a word people like to use, but just to say that like, you know, this project needs to upgrade its version of Python, or this one doesn't have the right kind of observability stuff built into it, or it does. I mean, like what's that notion called? Where you're like, you're moving way past just like a static wiki. It seems like.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be called. I know there's the way I look at it is it's giving developers control over the shortcuts that they use to access information. So like when you go to the Backstage catalog, when you find a specific component, like when you find your component on that page, you can add metadata that points to external services. So you could say, so for example, my logs are at this URL in the Kubernetes in Kibana. So when you click on the link, it will take you directly to the logs for that component. So
right.
And then you can use that link to essentially extract information from external services and then show that information on the catalog page. So you could say, now instead of going to Kibana, I can actually like programmatically pull information from Kibana and show those latest logs in the UI. So it gives you that kind of control over what you're seeing on a component per component basis, because it's not unusual for multiple pieces of software or technologies to play the same role. You know, so you could have like there might be different ways of getting different systems for viewing logs, but they could also be different like infrastructure providers being used within the same company for hosting the same thing. So like if you needed to go access, for example, secrets for one component versus another, it is not uncommon to see like, you know, AWS Secret Manager and HashiCorp Vault being used within the same company. So depending on which component, depending on your particular component, where you access those secrets might be different. So being able to use the catalog pages as a jumping point to where it is specifically for that component is really helpful for developers. So they don't have so they can find what they're looking for faster.
And then I suppose you could also like standardize on what's on each of those pages, right? Like to your point, you could say like every time you have a project or a component or whatever, you need to. It would be fantastic if you pointed to where the logs are for the current version you're running, and it would be great if you pointed towards wherever your issue tracker is or whatever, and that way you more standardize where all that stuff is instead of emailing around things.
Yeah, and even I think maybe the word that you're looking for, and I don't know if you mentioned it, is just annotation. Like annotation is both a mechanic within Backstage, like they have this concept of you can annotate any entity in the catalog, but it's also kind of a abstract process of deriving metadata that's available to the rest of the system downstream from the actual component. So just the fact that a component is registered in the catalog and you know where it lives, you know, now your portal can actually follow that location and say, okay, you registered this component, I can go visit it and I can see, oh, this is a Python project because it's got a PyProject file. And I can look at it and I can see its dependencies and I can see which version of Python I think was the example you used. I could see, hey, it's got these security vulnerabilities. And these are kind of enhancements and enrichments that you can do downstream of the actual project, but all they had to do was kind of register themselves or be discovered. So maybe it's both a mechanic and a process, this process of annotation. Or the derivation of knowledge based on just the mere fact of a component existing.
That's a mouthful. That you should write that down. That'd be a good blog. Yeah. So like you know like we mentioned several times, like y'all have been doing a lot of work with clients, kind of like building up their Backstage stuff and customizing it. And so like, you know, amalgamating that, like if you were like when you do, or when you think about like sitting down with someone, they're like, all right, we have nothing. Like what's the what's like the 6 to 12 month sort of like thing that they do? Like what's the first thing that they build out? What's like now it's, usually it's like after 3 months we've proven that we should keep doing this and actually pay the front side. And then like after that you want to expand to like some more teams, and then maybe they want to like customize it and add some stuff. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up based on software. But like what's kind of like, not generic in a bad way, but what's like the generic path that people go down as far as building up their backstage stuff?
I think that the best starting point, and hopefully companies do this, but this is not always the case. But hopefully the first step is asking their developers what it's like to be a developer at their company. Ask them like, what is your actual workflow? Like, how do you go about doing your work? And then what happens if you do ask, what often happens is the kind of feedback that you will get is, it's really difficult to find stuff. Like, I don't know where, when we've done this for our clients, what you will hear developers say is something like, I have a list of 170 links that I maintain, that I share with my friends, my colleagues at the company, because if you don't have the links, you might actually not be able to get your work done, because you don't know where the really complicated URL is for a specific service. So when they get feedback like that, then they can map that to something, to a feature of Backstage, and then they're starting to form their roadmap. And developers will tell you exactly what their problems are. It's just, I think what we're not used to is thinking about thinking about the platform as a product, thinking about your internal developed platform as a product, and thinking about like the actual what is it like to experience the platform. But when you ask the question, it's actually pretty easy to map those things to features, because these things that Spotify open source, if the plugins that Spotify open source, those plugins are solutions to very common developer problems.
Yeah, and then also like as I don't know, I almost feel like as it's frequently overlooked about stuff like this, because it comes from a third party, no one gets the chance to argue it into doing nothing, right? Like if you were coming up with your own way to build something like this in any large organization, you'd probably spend a lot of time talking about how you should do things, and one person would have this standard of doing it, another person would have this way of doing it, and then maybe you would just like forget about it because now it's time to have vacation. Whereas like if you've got a third party thing, like there's no debate about what you do. you just start using the tool, which seems useful.
I think the challenge with that is that what I'm observing in working with our clients is that there's definitely a path, but I think what's generally missing is this concept that we need to be actively solving developer experience problems. Like, there is friction and there is latency in the developer in the engineering organizations, but we don't have either the tools or we don't have the tools to observe it or to optimize it. So the best example of this is, in the past we didn't have a good way to, like, releasing software was very, we all knew that it would take months to do, but now, as a result of DevOps, we have, different stages for releasing software. So we could say, for example, our CI time is now, it was taking an hour to run. Now we, brought that down to 7 minutes. So we had both by having tools that give us the way to observe how long it takes, we were able to reduce that latency. Similar doesn't yet exist for developer experience in other aspects. So I think, and that's one of the challenges for a lot of companies, is that it's figuring out what to improve on their platform, given where they are right now, is something that people are learning to do now that the Backstage exists. It's kind of like laying out this foundation where people start thinking about how they can improve their developer experience.
Yeah. No, like you're getting to something I think of in this area a lot, which is, well, to put it one way, it's always shocking when you discover the need for something that you thought existed already. In the sense of, I mean, to use the old tired analogy, right? Like the cobbler's kids wear no shoes, right? And in this case, it's sort of like you have software developers who are by definition writing a bunch of software, and in general, collectively, they don't spend a lot of time writing software that helps the process of what they're doing. There's all sorts of people who write frameworks and like, I mean, that's, you almost have to stop developers from doing that so they actually work on the software that runs your business. But like,
Right.
but as far as like, what if we like wrote software that like makes the way that we collaborate and run better? And like we have plenty of stuff that's like, you know, from the old application lifecycle management and software delivery lifecycle. Like we have all sorts of tools for that, but none of, like, I obviously can't describe it very well either, but none of it sort of is like, well, here's, well, let me, as you were saying in your talk at Backstage Con, it's like, yeah, but when can I have Heroku? Right? Like when can I have that set of web pages that I go to that has all the same interface for finding stuff, explains to me how to use it, and allows me to just work on the process, for lack of a better phrase, just collaborating with people. And I mean, I guess it's sort of like astonishing to think this, but like I guess no one's done that before. Right? Like that hasn't existed.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have tried a lot to do it individually and for themselves, but there are just certain, it's like you said, how much of your effort is it, just from a business sense, feasible to expend on that? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 70%? And there's definitely a threshold there where you can't have a business if you're spending all of your time working on your internal developer platform. And so where, you know, shared solutions have to emerge in order to make it feasible for everybody to do it. Because, you know, one thing is for sure, you can't, you're like, your developer experience, it exists, whether you're observing it and where you're visible of it, not, you're like, you can't not have a developer experience. And so if it's, you know, if you can't invest in it, it's going to be bad. And so I think that, I think it just takes enough people acknowledging that it is something that needs to be solved and trying to sit down to do the work to solve it collectively. It's one of those things where it's very difficult for it to be emergent in a single place.
I think it also couldn't have been emergent because it was almost impractical to have it emergent previously because there's nothing you can do about it. Like before cloud native, before companies start to build internal developed platforms, when you're relying on third-party software that you do not control, when you're relying on monoliths that you cannot easily change, you can't really do much about, like, even if you wanted to change, you don't have any means to do it. And then I think what's happened with cloud native is that by giving you the granular pieces that you can use to assemble your internal developed platform, you now have control over the individual pieces. So now you actually have something that you can manipulate. And what's happened as a result is now people have realized, okay, well, I have an internal developed platform that consists of a whole bunch of tools, but what we're finding is that it's actually really difficult for developers to be productive. And so now there is you can attach a monetary value to not having solved this problem. Like not thinking about a developer experience actually has a cost. And this is what we're seeing now. I think what's changed in the last 5 years is that companies are actually realizing that it's really expensive for them to not think about the developer experience on the internal developed platforms. And so now they're standing up teams that are dedicated to improve that. And I think what's happening with Backstage is it's emerged as at the right time. You know, we went from, you know, a few years ago it had 50 adopters, a year ago it had 125, now it has 400 adopters, and it's being adopted really quickly because it is well understood. The need is well understood. Like the solution might not be, you know, but that's something that we're collectively learning. But the problem is now known.
So then, how about like two more things to go before we close out. One is, so I got all excited and drove us off the track of like the kind of like, you know, the build out that people have, right? And we stopped around just discoverability, right? Like having that your magic cheat sheet of like all the funny URLs you need to go to find the work to do. Like what? So once you establish like the catalog, if you will, you can discover things and find them. Like what are the next things that people start working on? Like what are the more kind of advanced stuff that people build in that I imagine, you know, y'all get hired to help out with a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you do want to. I would say it really depends on what aspect of that network of information is the most valuable to you. So you know, at its core, what you're constructing is a graph of the internal software ecosystem and all its constituents, and so you know, what aspect of that graph is you want to surface, I think is where people focus on next. Now that's the abstract answer. I would say surfacing the people associated with software, we've seen be something that's an extremely high value target. I don't know if you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, it's very much it very much differs for each company, because each company is going to have a different, like, their platform is going to be more complete in other areas and weaker in some.
Mm-hmm.
So the most standard thing that we see happening is creating templates that you can use to scaffold new components. So starting to standardize and make it easier for developers to create things. But depending, so that's a pretty common one as a kind of a next step. But what information you surface in the catalog very much depends on your biggest needs. Like, what are the biggest problems? Because at some companies, they might have a service built out. Like, it's not uncommon for us to see, like, some clients have an entity service that provides information about all the different things. So like they might already have a catalog. So for them to pull the information from the existing catalog and to surface it in Backstage, it's just a matter of like integrating with their service, with the existing service catalog. Or another company might have a system for querying relationships between services. So for them, it might be, okay, make that information available in Backstage so you can represent the structure. So there's in Backstage, there's a concept of systems and domains. It's a kind of organization of different information. So you might use Backstage to represent relationships between different systems within your organization.
Right.
And then going one level deeper, it'd be like, okay, showing how those things depend on each other. So like, if a service uses another service, and depending on what you have, depending on what you already have, like your approach to that problem or what your needs are going to be different. And so you kind of have to prioritize based on where your biggest pain points are.
Right. So you could generate the that old infamous like Netflix Death Star Mondrian thing, that they used to have, that was like, here's how all of our microservices connect together. And isn't that great? But I mean, that would be useful to see the graph of all your stuff. And if you have like thousands and thousands of applications and services, that's hard to track down. So then like kind of connected to that, like, so where at what point does like the intentions of what Backstage want to do like kind of cross over scope creep? Like if I were to say, so let's take like your monitoring stuff and we're just going to move that all into Backstage rather than being in your monitoring tool. Like that doesn't seem right. Like,
yeah. And I would say it's even against the philosophy of how Backstage is assembled.
Exactly. And so like where's that edge of like, here's something we could do that we need done, and like it doesn't belong over here in Backstage land. That's not like it's just programming. So we could put whatever you want on a screen, and like when you click a button, it could do whatever you want. But like that doesn't make sense to have it here. It's not part of it. Like, well, here's another one is like, so would you use Backstage to like do all of the human part of release management, or would you not? Like is that the UI you would use to release your software all the way to production, or would that be scope creep and you wouldn't do that?
It could be if that process touches multiple systems, because some place you need to touch multiple systems. Like from developer experience perspective, like you need to. I think this is where Backstage shines, is showing information from multiple systems. If you want to go, if you need to get deeper into like, you don't want to hide the system that you're integrating with, because it might have really useful information that you need at a specific time. So developers need to be able to jump to that system and find what they're looking for. So you don't want to. I don't think it's appropriate to bring everything into Backstage, but in the way that the systems overlap, Backstage might be the only place where this is actually possible.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
so,
that's a good guideline. That if you're trying to integrate together multiple systems to do something, integrate's the wrong word, but if you have to use multiple systems to accomplish some task, it's at least good to consider doing something.
Right. I mean, I think that Backstage is definitely not designed to unwind the progress of distributing stuff in microservices. It's to make it more powerful. So it doesn't do. I mean, it does a lot, but it's not designed to do particular tasks so much as aggregate information about what is being done.
Right. To be a portal, which I guess.
It really is, yeah.
Did we avoided that word the entire time?
No, I mean, you know, I was raised in the late '90s and early 2000s when Portal first came about, so I have weird feelings about.
You
the
even
word
had a
portal.
site called Portal Potty.
Yes,
.com.
like
I don't know if you still hold on to that domain.
like I don't know. I mean, I don't. Do people use the word portlet? That would be great if that reemerged. Probably.
There will all,
I never
all
knew
these
that
words
it
are going
emerged
to
in
come
the
back.
first place. Yeah.
Portlet is scope
It's just
creep.
like the same way that you always have a sitcom that's about 20 years in the past. So, you know, at any given moment, there's going to be a sitcom that takes place 20 years ago. Same thing with the vocabulary in tech.
Yeah.
There's some law.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, that's been good. See, I always just use these to educate myself and ask the questions I'm confused about. And I think I'm a little more cleared up and smarter. I don't know. We'll see. But is there anything you're thinking of that maybe we've left out to kind of defining like you know, what I want to do here is like define like what Backstage is beyond like, you know, a portal, and then like how people like the immediate gain that you would get, right? Which y'all went over well, is like, well, it's really hard to just find stuff, which sounds like a trivial problem, but is very important. and then you know, there's basically the kind of like what the stack looks like from a very high level. But I don't know, what do you think is going to be happening over the next year or so in this area? Like what is the community talking about as far as like, here's what we need to do now, like this is the next thing we need to work on?
I think the most important thing that's going to happen now is going to be making it easier for people to get engaged with Backstage, or for the users of Backstage to be engaged with Backstage in a way that is easy for them. So, because right now it's the process of building the portal is a little bit like it follows the typical, like, you know, you have a source code, you build a Docker image and you push it. So it has that process built into development, which means that if someone is using Backstage and they want to add, let's say, like, oh, for our project we use like a SaaS for doing logging, or for getting error logging from like a client application. Like, I would like to integrate that. So what they would need to do is they would need to clone the repo, add that integration as a React component, or or node process, and then create a pull request. It's going to get merged, and it's going to get redeployed, and it's going to be running. So that whole process takes a lot of work. So I think what's going to happen over this year is try to increase the number of things that teams can do without having to go through that whole cycle.
Right. Yeah, that makes. I mean, basically just making it more usable
Exactly.
for
Making it-
developers to add things.
Exactly. Yeah. Of varied
Yeah,
experiences,
yeah.
so they don't have to use React or TypeScript. They could just use the UI to add the things that they need and be able to amend like modify their experience modify their like Backstage experience based on their needs without having to go through a build cycle.
Yeah, well, hopefully it won't reduce from the typical. I mean, it seems like the cycle, whatever the format is you do the current configuration format squared, where the first phase is to write another layer. Nowadays, in our contemporary era, let's simplify the YAML on top of the YAML, and just make that easier to configure stuff, which always seems. I don't know. Maybe I'm too snarky, but that seems a little silly that you're going to simplify something by adding more of the thing on it instead of just simplifying the original thing. But I don't know. I just make slides. I don't know anything anymore. And then also, I mean, you brought it up several times. It seems I forget what you call this kind of thing, but it seems like one way of figuring out where to get started, in addition to asking developers, as you're saying, is like it's sort of like a little illustrative thing to say, like, all right, tell me how you find the logs. It's always logs, like to kind of make a point about how to organize stuff. It's just like how long does it take you just to find the most recent logs? And then that's a good use case to go out and solve really quickly. And then how do you find the logs for all the applications? Like how long would it take you to actually get those logs so you can start looking at them? Never mind the thrill of looking through a bunch of logs. Just finding them always seems like a something to test out as far as how your internal portaling for developers is working out.
Exactly.
Well, great. Well, thanks. So if people are interested in more of y'all, what would you point them at? Give us a call to action.
Call to action. We can go to frontside.com/backstage, and we also have we offer enterprise Backstage support. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Taras, but I know we have plans that are built to accommodate people wherever they are in their Backstage journey, whether you're just getting started.
What does that business look like? Like, I mean, y'all are also like some of the early people figuring out what the market in this area looks like. Like, what have you discovered you can get paid for so far?
Yeah, I think so right now what that support looks like is helping teams that are adopting Backstage be productive, which is essentially giving them the information they need when they need it. And we have, because there are teams that are being stood up specifically for building this, but learning all the tools that are necessary to be able to create a Backstage portal is not easy. Right. So we make it easier for them. And then another part of that is when Backstage doesn't do exactly what they need, as part of the service, we actually go and work upstream to make those changes for them on behalf of the team, so they can then just upgrade and get the latest version without having to fork their instance of Backstage, so they can keep staying current and be able to upgrade at any time. And I think the third thing is also navigating how do you actually accomplish something from product management perspective, because if you have you have a problem, there are a variety of different ways of solving it. And so knowing which solution to apply, I mean, this is one of the benefits that we have in our particular positioning, because we work with adopters and we look, we see their roadmaps, we see how they solve problems, we help them design solutions. We have right now, we support development of portals with over 100,000 users combined. So we have quite a varied perspective on how these portals are implemented. So we make that information, we make the information that product managers need to design their roadmaps for developer experience kind of available to them when they need it. So that's kind of where that kind of how that work.
You can I mean when you have well, not even that scale. When you have just even a small scale of different organizations doing something like this, you can speed up people's product management thinking, right? Because because that way they're not the first. They don't. It's rarely the case that someone is the first person who's encountered this problem, and there's usually other people who've solved it, and they don't have to reinvent the solution over and over again. It's the old on the especially in the enterprise software space, us on the sell side are always joking everyone thinks they have special problems, and I just talked to 3 people this morning who had that same exact special problem, and did you have to you can help people out understand that help is available and their problems
Mm-hmm.
are not detrimentally unique and special for them, which is always
One
nice.
thing, yeah, one thing that's really common to a lot of our a lot of our customers is that um, they look to Spotify for inspiration, but Spotify is a very advanced engineering organization. Like they created Backstage because they're a very advanced engineering organization. So the practices that Spotify has, they're kind of like the end goal where everybody wants to end up,
Mm.
but it's really difficult to implement the end goal when you're like, if you're like here on the left side trying to move up to the right side where you want to be, acting like you're already arrived there doesn't really work, you know. So because if you don't, you're not in the same place. Like Spotify has 40 teams already contributing to Backstage. If you have no teams contributing to Backstage, the way you're going to solve problems is going to be different. And this is what a lot of our work is helping them like think about how to solve problems at their particular place as opposed to how Spotify would solve it, because it's just a different way of like you act differently depending on where you are in your journey.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It'd be a bad idea to learn how to drive stick in like a Formula One race.
Exactly.
That's a great-
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
All right, well, great. Well, thanks for being on, and we'll see everyone next time. Bye.
All right.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was my weird try to have an edit there, but I'll end the broadcast here.
Cool.
Okay.